for being here to help us. My first question will be for Mr. Crawford. You did mention it a little bit, and I want to you to let us know when it comes to the impact of C45. Maybe just it's a very general question on what are the possible opportunities that this bill introduces for your specific area, and maybe some challenges. You did mention some challenges just in terms of perception. So just to kind of expand on that a little more, opportunities and
Okay, thank you. There's probably a couple of areas. One is just the validation of the product itself, that it's not a controlled substance, that people will have the opportunity and there'll be an opportunity for education to help people understand the nutritional benefits of industrial hemp. This is less of a problem in the fiber sector because we're not consuming it, but in the food side, there's misconception, and so this is an opportunity for us to get out from under this cloud of controlled substance. So I think that's extremely important. But I think the bigger component of the bill is the whole plant use. This is a plant like no other plant I've ever seen. I've been in agriculture for 45 years in Canada. I've been around when canola was developed from rapeseed, and the pulse industry, and all of these different industries have evolved through research and product development. I've never seen anything like this. This is a plant that offers food, fiber, feed, and natural health products. We get value from the seed in terms of oil and protein. We can build just about anything from the fiber. It's a remarkable product. The area that we haven't researched well at all, because it's been illegal, is the whole plant, the leaves and the flowers. This is where the cannabinoids reside. THC is a cannabinoid, CBD. But in hemp, the THC levels are very, very low. So we're able to produce a plant that's safe to eat, safe for consumers, nutritious. I give this to my 93-year-old mother, and she does really, really well. She likes it. It tastes good, and it keeps her quite vital. And so we don't know enough about that part of the plant, and now under the freedom of the whole plant use, I think that's where the significant growth is going to come. All of this to the benefit of Canadian farmers who currently, get very good returns for hemp as a product. It's challenging to grow, and I won't speak to that. That's Jason's area. But it also provides tremendous opportunity. And in more than one fashion, canola is known for its oil, wheat is known for its protein, but hemp has so many different applications. It's been idle for over 60 years. It's been illegal to grow. So while all of these other crops have matured and varieties have been developed, and there's been a lot of research and product development on it, we haven't had that opportunity. So we're in catch-up mode, and it's going to take a while. But there's a lot of people out there who see this, who are smart guys, and are really going to take this as quickly as it possibly can go. So the challenge is the cost of doing that. As an industry, we're quite small. We have a small number of members. We have a very small budget, so we don't have the funding for that research and product development and education. So those are the three key areas that we will continue to pursue. And then it's simply a matter of creating that knowledge and opening doors. Hemp is needs a tipping point. We need to reach a certain pivotal acreage where larger companies will start to use our products for fiber, for food, as an ingredient. Right now we're quite niche. We're in farmers markets, and we're in some small products on the shelves. And Manitoba Harvest and their Fresh Hemp Foods brand is doing very, very well. And our growth in Canada, I can't tell you how many people say, "Oh, I've got a bag of hemp hearts in my cupboard." So we know that people like it and use it, but there are so many other opportunities, and in the ingredient area is one of them. So we need to develop more ingredients based on products derived from hemp. Again, more research. So those are the challenges, to find the money, to find the collaborators and people in the industry who will take a risk and put their investment into the hemp industry and develop those products and work with farmers to help expand it.
Thank you very much. Do I still have a little bit of time? Nope.
I'll put you down for the second round.
Sounds good.
Senator Seidman.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all very much.
your presentations. My question is for Rosy Mondin. Mondin? Is it Mondin? Mondin. Okay, thank you. I'm from Quebec, so I might say Mondin.
North Italian, so it always throws people off.
Yeah. So your organization has stated that an effective tracking system is imperative to the efficacy of Canada's recreational marijuana regime. So I'd like to know, from your perspective and experience, how will the tracking system impact the spectrum of marijuana growers differently? And how can the system prevent diversion to the illicit market? And do you have any information about the operational status of the Government of Canada's proposed cannabis tracking system?
So we do recommend cannabis tracking. It's 2018 and the technology is there. So you can actually verifiably audit the seed to sale all the way through the supply chain. We've lobbied or advocated against warehousing. We're seeing British Columbia moving that route. The reason why is, first of all, it's a perishable product. So in its dried form, it doesn't have a long shelf life. Definitely the oils do, but then you start getting into the ingestible products, and again, shelf life changes. What we also see with warehousing is that you're also duplicating the costs of the security requirements that are needed. The licensed producers right now, the commercial growers, they have to meet quite secure facilities, right? Meet very secure licensing requirements. And it just seems very duplicative to have to take what's already modeled by the LPs to move product to another facility that now has to have its own security facilities, and let alone what about the security of the people in and out, because of course under the LP model people have to be vetted if you're a secured person in charge or the responsible person in charge. So you just see a lot of taxpayer dollars going to building and maintaining these facilities. Just seems redundant. So that's why we recommend seed to sale tracking. They've had success with that in other jurisdictions in the US, Washington, Colorado, Oregon. And seed to sale is done in other products as well, in agricultural products, and watching that supply chain. So I think it would be very, very effective for cannabis. And we do see that movement happening again in other jurisdictions. It seems to make sense. The technology is there, the companies are there, and there's some great made in Canada companies that are doing this as well, that providing the technology. So we should be supporting those businesses, these ancillary businesses that are supporting this industry. We have to remember we have only 104, 6 now, maybe licensed producers across Canada. To me, that's not really an industry, especially when they're just starting to be able to get banking. Lawyers, accountants are starting to get into this industry. So if you think about any other industry that has ancillaries that feed into it, that's just developing. So supply chain management, that's part of it. Transportation, I think the government would be very good at transporting the product where they don't necessarily have to warehouse it. Could also be open to the private sector as well, but that's something that they could utilize in addition to seed to sale. And
do you have any information about the operational status of the government's proposed cannabis tracking system?
Do you know?
No.
No, I don't offhand, but I could actually find out if you'd like me to get an answer for you.
Sure.
Happy
That'd be
to
great
get that
if
for
you
you.
could send it to the committee.
Absolutely.
Could I ask you also about another matter that your organization has spoken broadly to in the past? So we had testimony here from witnesses in Alaska and Colorado who spoke about the challenges in accurately labeling the THC content of cannabis products. And I know that your organization has spoken to this issue broadly in the past, noting that labs all use different testing standards, which you say poses a real challenge to businesses and to product safety. So if you could just elaborate on this a bit, and are you aware of any plans by the federal government to standardize or streamline testing going forward?
Well, definitely. So we know going forward, for example, the pesticide testing is going to increase substantially. I think they're looking at testing 119 different pesticides. You have to remember, too, these pesticides, a lot of them that are being used are food grade. The problem is once they're put onto this product, which ends up being heated and primarily smoked right now because it's dried flower primarily that's been going out, the properties of that pesticide changes and can turn to trace amounts of cyanide. So this is one of the big issues. So they are going to be having requirements to test. You're right on the standardization. right now for the cultivation of cannabis, there isn't even a monograph or a pharmacopoeia in Canada, made in Canada, for standardizing the cultivation, let alone standardizing the extraction process. So again, to have proper SOPs, to have that quality control, you need to know what's going on all the way through. So I think what's going to happen is you're going to see industry coming together and creating those standards. It probably should come from industry. They're the ones working on this product. We see in the U.S. there's a group called Focus that has created standards on various aspects of the industry. So definitely this is something that will develop, but it is something that can be developed as we are proceeding with legalization, because again, to try and do this under an illegal framework, it's really difficult to create those standards, get your hands on it, and work with the product. So yeah, there's room for that, and it's going to develop, absolutely, and it's needed.
Okay, thank you. Senatrice Meiji.
Oui, vous avez dit tantôt que
You said earlier that it was high time that growers of hemp, in fact, move ahead with legalization and the process therein. Now, if I look at the background, things got started in 1998. But prior to that date, who in fact grew hemp in Canada prior to 1998?
OK, vous pouvez répondre ici.
Yes. The short answer is no one. It was not legal to grow in Canada prior to 1998, other than up to 1937. So for roughly 60 years, it was not legal to grow at all. It grew wild as a ditch weed, is what was the term of hemp, but there was no legal production.
OK, mais était-il que fabriqué
But was it grown elsewhere, abroad? And is that what gave you the idea? Well, not you per se, but to the industry to do so.
The Narcotics Act of 1961 basically prohibited hemp to be produced anywhere in the world. Any signatory to that document agreed not to produce hemp. So it was widely not grown, I guess is maybe the best way to describe that. Farmers are an inventive lot, and they see opportunity and they go after it. And they recognize that this was a plant that had opportunity. So it was a small group of farmers in southern Manitoba, who, in Canada at least, who got the ball rolling on this back in the early 90s and lobbied government and basically helped author the industrial hemp regulations that were made legal in 1997. So Canada is actually a leader in that pursuit of the development of hemp as a commercial agricultural crop. And once again, I consider us leading the way in terms of the legalization of cannabis in its entirety.
OK. OK, merci.
Okay, merci. Senator Dean.
Thank you, Chair. Question for Ms. Mondin. First of all, thank you for the very helpful commentary on the US-based SAM report. We've heard it widely cited in the Senate chamber. We've heard it widely cited in this room. It does seem like a gift to opponents of cannabis reform. One of the more, and I'm going to call it extreme allegations made by SAM, is that there is an association between cannabis and the opioid crisis. And we heard a U.S. witness in this room last week tell us that and suggest that the legalization of cannabis could provoke an opioid crisis. We already have one, of course. Alternatively, we've heard that opioid overdoses and deaths have tended to decrease where cannabis is legalized. And we've heard that cannabis can be an aid to withdrawal from opioids, otherwise and sometimes described as a reverse gateway drug, completely the opposite from the suggestion that we keep hearing that cannabis is a gateway drug. Could you comment on that? Just tell us a little bit more about it.
Well, from what was found, again, I'm not the specialist in this area, of course, so I referred to those who are to help form this reply. And on their data, when they looked at everything, cannabis is not a gateway drug to opioid. And as you mentioned, it does do the reverse. In Vancouver, in fact, they've actually had a pop-up cannabis shop in areas where there's an issue with the opioid and fentanyl, and we know law enforcement has been supportive of that. They'd rather put their time and effort and energy into the opioid crisis rather than going after people with cannabis possession. So there's no evidence to suggest that state cannabis laws have contributed to the rising opioid use. This is what was found by our researchers, and there was no related harms across the U.S. as a result of the increase in cannabis use, contrasting that there is a rapidly growing body of evidence to suggest that cannabis liberalization may be helping to reduce opioid-related overdoses through promoting increased substitution of cannabis for opioids.
Okay, thank you. And I note in the paper that you say that SAM isn't a neutral entity nor university-based, has a long history of taking policy positions contrary to empirical evidence and emerging knowledge from U.S. jurisdictions that have legalized cannabis, that it's known for being heavily partisan and prone to misleading the public and legislators. Any further comment on that?
Yeah, I spoke to colleagues down in the U.S. and they were telling me that basically SAM, they don't hold much weight anymore because a lot of their claims have been disputed, refuted, and found to be completely wrong, false. They cherry pick information. They rely on old data. So they really aren't too much of a force anymore. They really actually are the only group that espouses these strong anti-legalization views. So they do show up at times to different events. I think there was something in Chicago where they had mentioned they were going to be there, but definitely their hold as is, because they haven't been progressing. So they still maintain a lot of the cannabis mythology, reefer madness fears around it, and that's what they propagate. So yeah, they're not really relied upon. From my understanding, from my colleagues that I speak to in the legalized states and other medical states, that they really don't, SAM doesn't hold much weight. So that's why it was very concerning to me when I heard that they were coming up to Canada to try and affect our policy here in Canada. We need a very Canadian tailor-made legislative framework for Canada. We have a robust cannabis industry. We have many people that operate in this industry that we want to have them transition. So having SAM come up, the U.S. is a very, very, very different situation than Canada. State by state is very different. They don't have a national policy. So when they even look at data where they say, oh, well, use is increasing or these ills are happening, well, you have to look at socioeconomic factors, racial factors, and the fact that surrounding states are not legal. So that contributes to some of the movement of cannabis, some of the ills that are happening, because people will come from one state to the other to access it, take it back home, move it, traffic it, whatever that might be. So here in Canada, the fact that we're doing it nationally is a very, very different framework and landscape.
Very helpful, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Senator Poirier.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for being here. My question is for Mr. Stewart. I want to quote a passage from a news release your company published last January, where it says, HiQ is focused on handcraft cannabis production, immersive retail experience, and building a portfolio of ionic, engaging cannabis-style brands. And also, you mentioned a while ago, and I saw also on your website, you talked about the product Van Per Pop, and it describes itself as one of North America's most recognized female-focused cannabis brands with an online content on your website. I also saw that it said designed to resemble a sleek women's magazine. I found articles that suggested that breastfeeding while using cannabis is safe, another about how cannabis can boost your beauty routine, and another suggested that cannabis can cure a hangover. So I guess my question is to you, Mr. Stewart, is how does your focus of engaging cannabis lifestyle brand fall within the purview of what's permitted in C45, especially specifically for the lifestyle advertising? And also, are you concerned that this adult-oriented content could be seen by young people, young persons on the internet?
Thank you very much for your question. So first of all, I think the press release and those passages are, of course, written and publicized outside of a legal recreational cannabis regime, which we're here to debate, discuss rather. Of course, once we get to a point where legalization has taken place, legislation is passed, regulations are passed, we will live by both the spirit and the letter of all of those laws and policies that are created by the government. I think that goes without saying. Vanderpop is a female-centric cannabis brand that was started by a 40-year-old mother of two who was a cannabis consumer, felt that nothing in the cannabis industry spoke to her as a consumer, and sought an educational platform to educate other women in similar situations to her on how you can consume cannabis in a responsible way while still being a good parent. Of course, it comes out of the U.S., and of course there's a lot of concern in the U.S. about emitting illegal activities when it comes to the possession of or child custody cases and the like. So what Vanderpop has seek to produce is a safe space for women to learn a little bit more about cannabis and how it can be included in their life. Sitting here as a 40-something-year-old white male, I am not the expert on the content on the female side of the space. That would be disingenuous to me as to whether or not it's effective. But by every social media metric, I think that it is a responsible way to communicate about cannabis. To your question about whether children could see this, well, I suppose children could see anything from pornography to violence to extreme cases of cannabis consumption, alcohol consumption, cigarette consumption on the internet. I think that if you were to look at our website and our properties, you would see that it is not marketed to children whatsoever. It is marketed towards women in a responsible and educational platform.
Do I have time for another one? Sure.
You do, but Rosy Mondin wanted to respond as well.
Can I just add a question to it, and then you can add on?
Sure, time.
Do you think that it's appropriate for a licensed cannabis producer to publish contents that makes unproven health claims about cannabis? I'm throwing that at you, and either one can answer. And if you have time, I wouldn't mind that you would answer, Ms.
I'll be very quick because I do notice the clock as well. I think that we should put an emphasis around in your question on health claims. I think there's a difference between health claims and effects of cannabis on the human body and effects that you can expect from consumption. Of course, I don't think any company would be supportive of making unfounded health claims. That's just simply not the Canadian way. But there is a vast body of evidence supported by numerous consumers as well as other institutions on the effects of different types of cannabis on the body. Whether that's as simple as what you can expect from a sativa or an indica, what you can expect from in terms of time of onset between edibles versus combustibles. There's a lot of information out there that we can talk about what to expect in terms of effect without making health claims. And I think that one of the failures of Bill C-45 is that it will not allow us to discuss effects with potential consumers. When you couple that with plain packaging, we really have a situation where we're handcuffing our legal regime to not be able to discuss effects and not be able to show differences between brands and products. That hurts us to compete with the black market. So I think there should be allowed some discussion about effects, stopping short of unproven health claims.
I just wanted to quickly mention on the branding side of it, if we look at, I hate making the comparisons to alcohol, but we're looking at people who are going to be accessing, people who are going to be accessing this product through regulated retail outlets. So first of all, we're going to be stopping youth from going in. So this concern about the branding, labeling, and packaging, really, it's when there's parental guardianship is going to be very important to make sure, just like with prescription drugs, they tell you where to keep it, how to store it, and how to throw it away. So the same should be done with cannabis. But, we enter this with such fear, and I think because of the unknowns around this product, coming from BC, it's been around for decades, and a lot of this fear has been dissipated. As a woman, too, when you go into the store, you want to purchase something, you tend to gravitate towards a brand. That brand, because you know that when you open, say, that bottle of wine, it's going to give you a consistent standard product each and every time, and you venture to that brand. How that product came to be, whether that grower cultivates his own product or knows how to get excellent product to create that brand, doesn't matter to the consumer. They just want standard that they open it, they know it's good. So we can have that with cannabis. You can still have branding that isn't attractive to children, but still is something that you would recognize. I like J. Lore. I know exactly when I go up that I can buy the J. Lore, and that's going to give me the wine that I expect each and every time. I know that brand, I know the consistency. The same can be said with cannabis. So having overly restrictive branding, I just don't know if it serves that purpose as stopping use, because people are going to be going to these retail outlets to consume, and they need to know what they're getting. They want to know the compounds, the components of that product, and and how it might affect them when they take it. Because, again, it's more than just THC. There's terpene profiles. There's other cannabinoids. We're going to see growing changing. It's not going to stay indoors in the bunker styles that we've seen in the past, because it's been done that way because it's been illegal. So there's been a rush to cultivate a plant to the highest THC content possible. But I think as we move forward and we start looking at robust genetics, starting at the nursery level, where they're now cultivating plants with a multitude of cannabinoids, where you get into the extraction, you start extracting. If you think about the perfumery industry, you start with botanicals and you start pulling all the different compounds and you blend them together and you formulate. So you can reformulate for medicinal purposes or for the intoxicating effects that you want. And that's going to be driven to by that brand and what they're able to create and develop under that brand.
Okay. Good taste in wine. Senator Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. For Mr. Stewart, first, in your presentation, you talked about the possibility of maybe having 30 stores across Canada in short order. I'm just wondering if you could elaborate for us on the discussions with the provinces and the setup of the stores. Are they different in each province? Is there different regulations? I know in the news in my own province, Newfoundland and Labrador, today in the House of Assembly, there was questions raised about the proximity of stores to youth and so on. So I just wondering what the process is across the country, and maybe you can give us some idea of what you're experiencing there.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the question. I will start with Newfoundland and Labrador. We have chosen to make an investment in a production facility there, and I think we're in an old fish processing plant, so regenerating that facility. That will allow us to have a couple of stores in Newfoundland and Labrador. So we expect to have 5 retail storefronts in Newfoundland and Labrador at some point, as well as farm gate sales at our production facility. Moving to Manitoba, which I would say is probably the most advanced of any of the provinces at this point. There were a number of applicants. Some have set up to 200 applicants for private sector retail licenses, for master licenses in Manitoba. We were one of only 4 companies that won one of those master licenses with our Tokyo Smoke storefronts. We expect to create 9 to 16 stores there. I've had a very positive relationship with the regulators, and I'll be returning to Winnipeg next week again to further our discussions, share store designs, etc. Saskatchewan, the lottery is ongoing. We have submitted there as well. In Alberta, we have applied for storefronts in the city of Calgary, and we're awaiting the city of Edmonton to open up their process, which will be a lottery-based process. In British Columbia, they have started with their legislation as well. However, they do have a prohibition on licensed producers having storefronts in British Columbia, so it's really up in the air at this point as to whether or not we will actually operate our Tokyo Smoke storefronts in British Columbia, but we're working proactively with the regulators there as well. And in Ontario, we've submitted a number of SKUs of both product from a series of our brands, as well as branded paraphernalia for consideration by the Ontario cannabis stores to be retailed in their storefronts. And we will continue to operate our existing 5, 6 coffee shops across the country as brand ambassador stores where we're able to do so without selling cannabis.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Mondin, I get accused of being from Newfoundland and Labrador and talking fast, but your presentation was even faster than I so pardon me if I may have mistaken something you said, but I want to touch on look, we have received an incredible amount of information here over the past couple of months, and as you would understand from people on both sides of this issue, a great concern is the youth use, you know, in your reply you quote the numbers in relation. And just wondering from a point of view of overall use, the stats behind what you're telling us versus what we've been told by others. And we've heard from several, and it certainly seems to be the concern of the age limit, because we're talking in legislation of the age of 18. There's been suggestions of raising that to 21. There's been suggestions of raising it to 25 in regards to brain development and so on and so forth. So I just want to give you the opportunity to maybe elaborate on what your knowledge of that is, because it's certainly, to me as a senator from Newfoundland and Labrador, it's one of my biggest concerns.
Well, I think if we look at the mandate for legalization, there's three main mandates. We have the public health mandate to supply safe and tested product, to keep it out of the hand of youth, and to put a dent into the black market. By virtue of legalization, we will have safe and tested product, and by virtue of legalization, we will make it harder for youth to access this product. Youth are always going to experiment. They are going to find an older brother, sister, cousin who is going to purchase product for them. They'll find ways to get it. They do already with alcohol. I'm not encouraging any use. The point is, if they do get their hands on it, which they likely will, we'll make it harder for them by the fact that they have to get ID'd, so that's a deterrent in and of itself. But if they do get their hands on it, at least now we know that they're getting it through a proper supply and it's properly tested and it's a safe product. We also know from hearing from Dr. Mark Ware that the point where the developing mind is most vulnerable is around the age of 13, 14, and it diminishes significantly thereafter. We have people, I mean, at 21, you're an adult. You can drive at 16. You can ruin yourself financially by taking out loans, for example, that have really significant impacts on people. So when we hear from experts that say specifically that 18, 19 is a good place, it's where it's in line with alcohol, it's in line with other products, it's in line with what they're allowed to do at that age, like taking out loans, getting financing, getting married, having children, accessing product. There's so many things. I think back to, when I was a youth, to have access, especially being in university for so long, everything is around drinking. You want to go out and you want to enjoy yourself and you have a drink. If there was options to me, even as a young person at 19, 20, where I could actually access a cannabis drink that's not alcohol-based, that may be giving me a bit of an intoxicating offense, I probably would have preferred that than drinking. And I think it will change a lot of people's lives in university. You don't make stupid decisions when you're on cannabis the way you might with alcohol. So I just think the evidence that we have, that our researchers found, that it doesn't have little to no impact on overall youth use. They will experiment, but I think by virtue of carding, providing ID, that significantly will reduce their access up front.
We're running out of time.
Yeah.
I have time for a quick response from Mr. Stewart and Mr. Green, and then we'll close the meeting.
Thank you, Senator. I just briefly say that I think that an age of 18 or 19 or in line with alcohol ages is the right approach for this bill. I understand there is medical evidence that suggests something else. I'm not a doctor, but having spent a lot of time in public affairs and politics in my life, I was often forced with making that choice. As public policy makers, you should seek to make a choice that reflects reality and doesn't come down on one side of one medical report or another medical report. Aligning it with alcohol, voting, armed services, service, etc., is the right place for it to be.
And Mr. Green.
Yes, I'd just like to make a comment earlier. The question that was asked about industrial hemp, if we're restricted on outdoor cultivation. We currently are not, and under the Bill C-45 we won't be, but what we are restricted on is whole plant utilization to gather all of the leaf materials and whole plant materials and the farmers, and we would ask that there's some type of mechanism that would allow us to get those materials into the ACMPR. So we are restricted for the whole plant use. Just wanted to emphasize that.
Okay, one little last.
Thank you. Just a quick addition to my comment too, just looking at the paper here. So approximately 2% of the youth population who use cannabis do so in ways that may be described as problematic. 2%. That's what's found by our researchers. So again, we have to be very careful to not make policy to just affect the outliers. We have to look at everyone else, of course, and not just look at that 2% issue in a vacuum.
Okay, and with that, I thank all four of you. You've been quite helpful to us. I appreciate your being here. And committee members, we adjourn now, but we're back at 10:30 tomorrow morning. Okay? Okay, this meeting stands adjourned.